Now, of course, every single farmer wants to be profitable. You want your entity, your business, your project to make money for you. But the question has to be, how can you achieve that sustainably? Here to talk to me about that from Nedbank is Maluta Netshaula. Maluta, so simple question. How do I use my piece of land optimally?
So historically, I think the way farmers used to produce, they used to aim for the highest yield, at all costs. I mean, perhaps they were competing in terms of, I've got the better yield than my neighbor, etc. But that didn't really translate to profits. When it comes to profits, you find that someone who was perhaps following the right procedures, doing the right things, like doing their soil preparations right, getting an agronomist in, do the soil test. If you do everything right and you make sure that you have got all the programs in place in terms of planting program, know when to plant, know when to harvest, know when to do what to do in terms of crop rotation to keep your soil active and moisture content, etc., then that should be able to assist you to make sure that you are much more sustainable than someone who is just chasing yields.
Okay, so we've gotten to that particular stage. What should one do post-harvest?
So after you've delivered your crop, whatever crop it is, to the market, then you need to decide what you're going to do with the land. Oftentimes, people will put in livestock to feed on the crop rest, if it's grains. Or sometimes people will put in winter crops, which is like oats and rice and wheat and all those things that can be able to assist them with additional income while they wait for another season to plant their grains. Others will put cover crops like pastures, for example, that they can then use to feed their livestock. So in order to, I think, to deal with pests and disease and all those other things, crop rotation assists in order to, if I can put it in a, I think, interesting ways, to confuse the pests so that they don't get used to the same crop, because then they build tolerance to that type of crop, and then you can have, if you keep putting the same crop over and over, then you can have quite a big problem. But if you rotate, then it sort of assists to deal as a natural, I think.
And obviously the buzz term right now is conservation agriculture, isn't it?
Yes.
And this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think along those lines, but conservation agriculture is quite broad. So by conservation agriculture or sustainable agriculture is applying principles that assist in order to sustain the sector or your operation, in terms of starting with the soil, with how you treat your food or produce loss, how you apply your fertilizer and the type of fertilizer you apply. Is it chemicals or is it biological fertilizers, like, for example, chicken manure or other things that come from other natural sources? So that's when you then start to talk about conservation agriculture. It's also about using the water in the most efficient way possible. Previously, they used to flood the lands with water, which is quite wasteful. And then they moved to the likes of center pivots that are still being used. But there are even more efficient systems out there, like drip irrigation, for example, or micro irrigation, that use a fraction of the water but have amazing results.
Okay, so it's all lovely to talk about conservation agriculture. We know we need sustainable agriculture, but at the same time, we need to look at food security. It's a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very much so, Tony. But I think if we can balance sustainability with food security, I think it can work for everyone in terms of the sustainability of the sector. You must also remember that there is a lot of unutilized land, vast amounts, about 1.6 million hectares that lies unutilized or underutilized in the former homelands. I'm talking about KZN, Limpopo, Eastern Cape. So if we can bring those lands along the same sustainability principles, because we also want to future-proof for the next generation, then you can imagine how powerful that can be. It won't only feed us now, It will also feed the future generation. It will also assist with improving household food security, which is quite a big issue now during COVID.
It is interesting because during the times that we live in now, COVID-19, I think agriculture has seen more growth than any other industry, while the other industries are practically receding to a certain extent. I think there was 28% growth in agriculture in South Africa during even these times, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's actually they actually focus around about 10% growth in terms of the GDP or contribution to GDP over this time of COVID as opposed to other industries. So you're also seeing agriculture also being very important in terms of food security. It's also one of those sectors that was categorized as essential service. It's also a sector, but also within COVID, we also saw quite a lot of or gaps or loopholes in the value chain, and also the importance of the informal sector to the mainstream value chains. For example, when they cut off the informal sector, the guys that used to go pick up fruit and veggies and livestock from the fresh produce or livestock from the abattoirs, that sort of supply chain was cut off, and those guys in the commercial side were left with a lot of stock that they didn't know what to do with it. That's when they started to realize that, hey, these guys were actually playing quite a huge role. And now they are starting to appreciate the role that the informal sector, being the hawkers on the street, being the guys cooking on the side of the road, or the guys in the spaza shops. So you can see now it's all interlinked. And when you cut off one side of the sector, then you have got a huge, even financial impact on the other.
It's amazing that if we're talking about the hawkers and so forth, if we just look at the numbers of hawkers that we have and what amount of produce they have, put it all together, that is a lot.
Yeah,
that's what you're talking about. The numbers become, huge, exponential.
Yeah, it's quite big because the informal sector contributes quite a lot to the agricultural food system, and I just hope the policymakers and everyone who's making all these rules realizes that sooner than later. Otherwise, we're going to have huge food security, especially at household level, and huge unemployment because now you're cutting off critical sectors of the economy.
Maluta, thank you so much. It's been interesting chatting with you.
Thank you, Tony.
Well, there you have it, Maluta Netshaula from Nedbank, telling us why it is important for you to farm sustainably, especially on the African continent.